In this video, we're going to talk a bit about bile, what it's made of, and a little bit about a very special circulatory route that involves the recycling of bile. Now, when we're looking at bile, it's a yellowish green and it's also alkaline type of fluid. Now, what do we find in there? Some of the main components are the bile salts. The bile salts are actually derived from cholesterol, and they play a very important role. They function in the emulsification of fat, and this is of course very important for the absorption of fat. Now we have also bilirubin, and we've come across this term before when we talked about the breakdown of red blood cells, and this is a pigment formed from heme. Bile will end up in the intestine, and when it does, and the large intestine will have bacteria that will break it down into stercobilin, and that's what gives the brown coloration of feces. Well, what else do we find in here? Yes, bile salts are derived from cholesterol, but we can find cholesterol itself, triglycerides, phospholipids, and electrolytes also in here. Now, let's just talk a bit about the recycling. It's stored in the gallbladder and released into the small intestine. Now, much of this is recycled. So we have this thing called the enterohepatic circulation. And this is a recycling loop that helps to conserve the bile salts. And we do a really good job of using the bile salts in the intestine and recovering almost all of it. So we don't have to always make new bile salts. So what happens is the bile salts are absorbed into the blood by the ileum. Of course, that's the last part of the small intestine. Returned to the liver by the hepatic portal vein, and resecreted in newly formed bile. And this is very effective because about 95% of the bile salts that are secreted are recycled. So that means only 5% has to be newly synthesized every time. And we can just see sort of the basic diagram here and walk through some of the basic steps. Is that number one, the bile salts are secreted into the duodenum, stored in the gallbladder, concentrated in the gallbladder, and released into the duodenum itself. And as bile salts travel through the intestine, they are going to aid in lipid digestion by emulsification and the absorption. Now, 95% of the bile salts are reabsorbed in the ileum, and of course that's the last part of the small intestine. So they'll travel through, they're released, they travel through, they help with emulsification of fats, they help with digestion, and down here in the far part, or the ileum of the small intestine, they are put back into basically the hepatic portal vein. And the hepatic portal vein, of course, based on this name, will give us a big indication that it will travel back to the liver. So the fourth step is we get reabsorbed bile salts, travel by the hepatic portal vein back to the liver, where they're recycled. And as I said earlier, only 5% of bile salts are newly synthesized. So that's a little bit about bile and the enterohepatic circulation.